So welcome to today's webinar, which is on understanding notifiable medical conditions for driving and driving with dementia. My name is Rob Hurd. I'm the chair and founder of the Older Drivers Forum and will be your chair for today's webinar. I am a retired police officer. I did 30 years in the police and 27 of those was as a roads policing officer. So I have a huge knowledge on traffic law to help any questions that you might have in relation to that. So before we get started, I will be playing a short video with you just to basically explain something to do with a lady called Valerie Singleton, who's looking after and supporting this week's webinars. As many of you know, Valerie Singleton is a trusted and well-known journalist, travel writer, and TV presenter. Many of you remember her on Blue Peter, and who will never forget that time when she had the baby elephant causing chaos in the studio. Val is a keen supporter of older drivers, being one herself, and more recently, she has worked closely with the road safety and breakdown organisations, GEM Motoring Assist, working on a thing called Safe Driving in Older Age. And you will see those videos all on our website under the video tab. So let's play her video. Let's just get that all set up and working for you. I'll just play this, get it working ready, and I shall start that play.
Hello, we're delighted that you can join today's webinar. This webinar is just one of several webinars taking place this week, hosted by the Older Drivers Forum. Each webinar is on a different subject and designed to help and support you to carry on driving safely for longer. This week of webinars is to support the Project Edward Week of Action titled Fit for the Road. Project Edward stands for Every Day Without a Road Death, and it's an annual UK-wide campaign for road safety. It's backed by government, the emergency services, highways agencies, road safety organisations, and British businesses. Shockingly, on average, 5 people a day are killed and around 150,000 people are injured each year on roads in Great Britain. Unfortunately, 20% of all deaths on our roads are older people. As older licence holders is increasing every year, fatalities for drivers aged 70 and over are forecast to increase by 22% by 2040. As an older driver myself, I am fully aware how we can't become complacent about our abilities. We all need to focus on our own road safety and making sure that we are fit for the road, not only to protect ourselves, but others. This week of webinars, I hope will give you lots of useful information and help us all become safer road users while supporting us to carry on driving safely for longer. I wish you all the very best and please stay safe.
So thank you, Valerie, for giving us that input. And so let's move on. We have 2 speakers today for you, like I said, and who will help you become safer drivers and also give you all that advice on notifiable medical conditions and dementia. Our first speaker today is Professor Michael Hornberger, who will talk about dementia and how it can affect our driving. Michael is the Professor of Applied Dementia Research at Norwich Medical School. His research group employs various research methodologies, being clinical, cognition, sensory technology, neuroimaging, and genetics, as well as disease interventions for their research studies. His current research is particularly focused on spatial orientation and navigation deficits in dementia, and this has an impact on people's outdoor activities such as driving and walking safely. So really current for what we're looking at today. So thank you very much, Michael, for joining us, and I shall hand over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Rob. I'm delighted to be here today and to talk to you a little bit about dementia. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So yes, I'm talking about dementia and driving. I think the first really point to start with is to determine what is dementia. Let's get our definitions right. And so dementia at the moment is the 3rd most common disease in aging after heart disease and stroke. And this is actually meant, dementia is meant to overtake heart disease and stroke in the next few years. That's very, very common in the population. And dementia is what we call an umbrella term for the impaired ability to remember, think, or make decisions that interfere with everyday life activities. Several different diseases are under this umbrella, and I just show you some of them. So you can see Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and dementia with Lewy bodies. Now, I've ranked them for how common they are, and Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia are by far the most common ones. Then frontotemporal and dementia with Lewy bodies are much less common or rarer forms of dementia. There are other different forms of dementia. In total, there may be around 17 different types of dementia overall. But as I said, Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia. Around 60 to 70% of people with dementia will have Alzheimer's disease. And today, therefore, I talk mostly about Alzheimer's disease, but I can talk in the Q&A about also the rarer forms if you want to. Important to remember is that although dementia mostly affects older adults, it is not a part of normal aging. So this is a very important. These are different diseases which affect our brains, and in particular by proteins which basically go wrong in our brains and cause these symptoms and the disease. So now we know what is dementia. So what are the kind of recommendations currently by the DVLA on dementia which doctors get? And these are really kind of the recommendations doctors follow when they have somebody with a dementia diagnosis. And you can see the important thing, first of all, is that it said it's a possible driving impairment. So they may be able to drive, but must notify the DVLA. It's difficult to assess driving ability in people with dementia. And the DVLA acknowledges that there are varied presentations and rates of progressions, and the decisions on licensing is usually based on medical reports. So that's a very important point as well. There are differences between people, can really make a big difference whether you will be continue to drive or not. And considerations for the clinicians are how good the memory is, how disorientated people are, the lack of insight and judgment, which very often, if you have all of those, means that you're not fit to drive. Also, disorders of attention cause impairment, and in early dementia, when sufficient skills are retained and progression is slow, a license may be issued subject to annual renewal. And then the recommendation that a formal driving assessment may be necessary. And of course, Rachel is going to talk more about that because that's really what they're working on. So what should you do after diagnosis with dementia? And as we just heard, if you have a diagnosis of dementia, you must inform the DVLA straight away. There is this form called CJ1, which you can get from the website, or you can ask the kind of a paper form. So if you do not notify the DVLA, you can be fined up to £1,000. So it's a very, very severe fine. You also must inform your insurance provider straight away, otherwise your policy might not be valid. And in the UK, of course, it is illegal to drive without at least third-party cover. So it's very important that you inform your insurance as well of your diagnosis. So what will the DVLA do? The DVLA will ask about the person's medical information and decides if they are safe to drive. And the DVLA may ask the person to have a driving assessment like we just read. And some people with dementia decide for themselves to stop driving and surrender their driving license. And this is a very important kind of point that for some people, it might be easier to stop driving straight away, and they surrender therefore their license. So a really interesting question is how much insight into driving problems have the people with dementia themselves? And there's various studies of this. And of course, I always have to, in a way, think about myself in this. We all seem to overinflate our ability to drive. It seems always that it's all the other drivers which are the problem, but we ourselves are not the problem. So how about people with dementia? Now, I'll show you a table of a study, which is slightly busy. This shows you basically I hope you can see my cursor. This shows you basically the people with dementia and their carers, and they were indicating whether they had reports concerning about their driving. And what you can see, the person with dementia, around 10% thought they had any problems with driving, while over 72% of the carers thought that they had problems with driving. So there is a discrepancy clearly with that, and that really has quite large implications. That if you ask a person with dementia how their driving is, they very likely will report that they're perfectly fine and there's no problem. And I've seen this many, many times. Well, if you ask them the carer or the family to give you an account, they will tell you of all kinds of stories or near misses which happened over time. So it's really something very important to remember as well when you talk to people, or when you want to be aware of their problems, to always check with the families, and also tell your doctor, if you go to the doctor and they just ask the person with dementia, then ask them if you could also talk to them separately to report these incidents. So it's a very important point to make. The other question is always, after which event do people with dementia actually stop driving? And here is another this is a graph from another study. And what it shows you very interestingly is that the vast majority of people really stop driving only after they get a recommendation after a fitness to drive assessment. So what Rachel and her colleagues are doing. And this is in contrast to lots of other, for example, family members telling you to stop driving, or an authority figure, which would be a doctor or a policeman or woman. You can see that percentage is much, much lower. And even scarier, I think, are the near misses, that after a near miss, only 1.5% of people with dementia really stop driving. So it's really the fitness to drive assessment which is key for people to realize that this is an objective assessment and that it's really recommended that they stop driving. However, the question is, how many people actually stop driving after being told to stop driving? So I have a little poll for you now. Rob, if you could put up that poll. So how many people do you think with dementia continue driving despite being told to stop? So the choices are 1%, 5%, 10%, or 30%. Give you a little bit of time to make your choices. Okay, let's have a look. And well, the majority got it right. It is 30% of people with dementia continue driving despite being told to stop driving. So, which is really, I think, quite an astonishing high figure. But of course, it has various reasons, which we can talk about as well in the Q&A. For many people, especially if they live rurally, it's very hard to get around, or if they live alone by themselves. So it makes a big, big difference. And many people, of course, lose their freedom in a way to move about once they lose their license. Right, let's move on. So how do dementia symptoms actually affect driving? And the dementia diagnosis is not by itself a reason to stop driving. As we've just seen in the DVLA recommendations, people might still continue driving. And 1 in 3 people with dementia actually continue driving. However, the most important thing is whether the person can still drive safely with dementia, because dementia affects our cognition or thinking progressively. And driving may feel easy and natural for people who drive often or have been driving for many years. However, it is a complex task that involves quick thinking as well as sensory, vision, hearing, and manual skills. It means we will find it increasingly difficult to do everyday tasks, in particular if they are complex when we have dementia. And our thinking problems will really make, therefore, driving also very, very hard. So driving, as I said, is a highly complex task, and it requires many different cognitive functions, such as the following ones. So people with dementia very often have a loss of focus and attention, and this can lead to make it harder to focus on the complexity of traffic that around oneself, basically. So you're not anymore aware of as much, or can focus so much on so many things at the same time. Visual spatial symptoms can lead to be not aware anymore of the right speed, distance, or one's position on the road. So these are more that we can have our where we are in a way, but it's not disorientation. It's much more that we know where we are in relation to others. And for the road, of course, that's quite critical as well, where we are as well in the road. Judgment and decision-making symptoms make it much harder to understand and prepare for the actions of oneself and other road users. So that very often, of course, in driving, people talk about this forward thinking, that you anticipate what's going to happen, and that will become much harder once you have these judgment and decision-making symptoms. And finally, it's the spatial orientation symptoms, which are really critical. So many people are not aware of spatial orientation being so common, but people with dementia get very easily disorientated, and that really leads to losing one's bearings or even getting lost. Now, one thing you've noticed here, of course, I haven't mentioned memory here, and memory is, of course, the most common form of symptom in dementia. But memory studies have repeatedly shown that memory has very little contribution to driving performance or driving incidents or accidents in dementia. And it shows you that these other symptoms, which are less commonly looked at, which are more important for actually our driving safety when we have dementia. Memory contributes, of course, slightly to that, in particular when people forget to get from one place to another. But as I said, it's a less contributing factor than these factors I've mentioned here. And the progressive cognitive problems make it increasingly harder for people with dementia to continue driving. And at some stage, people with dementia will have to stop driving, as their cognitive impairment does not allow them to remain safe on the road. And this is, of course, a very difficult decision point to when is this point reached? However, the good news is that research indicates that in the early stages of dementia, most people still remain able to drive safely. Only when the disease progresses, many people cannot drive anymore. This is usually only what we call the middle stages of the disease, but it can vary from person to person quite significantly because the progression is differently between different people. Just another caveat that some forms of dementia might mean people have to stop early to drive. And I just give you 3 examples. These are 3 rare types of dementia, and 2 I mentioned already before, but 1 I haven't. So posterior cortical atrophy is a rare type of Alzheimer's disease, and it causes more problems with the vision. So people have really problems seeing things. It's not their eyes which are affected, but it's actually the vision areas in the brain which are affected by the dementia. And of course, the vision problems make it very hard to continue driving. Dementia with Lewy bodies, these people have very often quite vivid hallucinations, which can make it very hard, because if you, of course, see something in the road and might react to it, but it's a hallucination, it might make, you might swerve while nothing is on the road. Frontotemporal dementia, this is a type of dementia where people have usually quite significant behavior changes, and especially the impulsivity affects their driving, so that people are more impulsive and do not wait. And for example, if they want to turn into traffic, they do it more impulsively, which can endanger themselves and, of course, other road users. But just to say, these rarer forms of dementia have been much less investigated actually for driving safety than Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia, the most common forms. But we just need to be aware of that. So how can I keep safe driving when having dementia is another very common question we're getting. And there are some tips to stay safer on the road. For example, don't go for long periods without driving. It's really to keep your skills and stay confident. And keep to short and familiar routes. You're less likely to get lost. So this is all trying to counter the spatial orientation or navigation problems people have. So short, familiar routes, people are usually fine with those because we've done them so many times. But if you go for a long, unfamiliar route, it will become very, very stressful, and you might get easily lost. Drive at quieter times, not the rush hour. It really avoids the stress and distraction in heavy traffic. And distraction is here the key word. Again, the attentional problems in dementia are key for this. So you want to avoid a lot of distractions happening. Drive in daylight with good road and weather conditions. I think it's key, again, just in general, a good driving rule. Then we're coming back again to the distractions like the radio for better focus. Again, the attentional deficits, are really key. And only drive when you're fully awake and well, of course. If you're feeling sleepy or not well, do not drive at that stage if you can avoid it. Even if the DVLA decides that a person can keep driving, it may be helpful for them to plan ahead for when they must stop completely. So talking to others about this and making some changes to their usual arrangement can make it much easier to stop driving when the time comes. It's really the whole planning ahead, making a plan when the people should stop driving. As I said, many people still continue driving, and it really causes a lot of disruption and stress to the person with dementia, as well as their families, in particular if they continue driving. Sorry, let me just go back with this. So these are situations when the person with dementia, for example, refuses to stop driving, and it's extremely distressing to them, their family, and even to their doctor. And for the person, of course, they might not understand why they need to stop driving. For the family, they're really worried that they stay safe. And for the doctor actually, if they're aware of this situation, they must notify the authorities of that, even without the person's consent, which makes it a very difficult situation. And there are situations where you can, for example, try to hide the keys or try to hide the car, or you really disable the car, for example, by using either a wheel lock or a steering wheel lock, which you need to be removed. But I know of other really drastic examples, for example, for family where the sons in the end removed the spark plugs from the car so that the father couldn't drive anymore. So again, very distressing for the family. So it's better to make these conversations, have them early, or potentially surrender your license if you can do already. Now, the last few minutes, I just want to spend on mild cognitive impairment. So we talked so far about dementia, so when people have a dementia diagnosis, but many people get also a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. So what is mild cognitive impairment? Mild cognitive impairment causes cognitive changes that are serious enough to be noticed by the person affected and by family members and friends, but do not affect the individual's ability to carry out everyday activities. So this is the critical thing. They have changes, in particular cognitive changes, but they can pretty much do their everyday activities as normal. Approximately 12 to 18% of people aged 60 or older are living with MCI. MCI can develop for multiple reasons, and this is very important. So individuals living with MCI may go on to develop dementia, while others will not. And again, it's very important to realize that in some individuals, MCI reverts to normal cognition or remains stable for various reasons. In other cases, such as when medication causes cognitive impairment, MCI is mistakenly diagnosed. So you can see it's a very diverse group of MCI. So having MCI doesn't mean you develop dementia, but a large proportion of people who have MCI will develop dementia. So what are the DVLA recommendations for MCI? And it's really divided here into no likely driving impairment, and they may drive and need not to notify the DVLA, or they have possible driving impairment as established by the doctor in the family. And it's really difficult to assess driving ability in people with MCI. And again, the DVLA acknowledges that there are varied presentations and rates of progressions, and the decision on licensing is usually based on medical reports. And again, you come back to short-term memory, which, interesting, as I said, doesn't really affect the much driving, but disorientation, lack of insight and judgment, and again, attentional problems. So again, it might be, a formal driving assessment may be necessary, and a license may be issued subject to review. So it's up to really the clinician to determine whether the people with mild cognitive impairment have driving impairment. As a guide rule, the more significant cognitive problems a person with MCI has, the more likely they are required to have a driving assessment. But I should say that much less is known about MCI and driving, similar to the rare dementias. So we do not know as much about MCI and how it affects the driving as we do about dementia. So this is a matter of a lot of ongoing research, and this might affect future guidelines. Yeah, that's what I just said. So it's really, and in particular, we want to, of course, identify people who progress to dementia and to keep them driving as long as possible to stay independent, but of course, in a safe manner. Just to give you a final hint, there is some interesting research happening in also MCI driving training. So this is a study from Japan, and where the people with MCI were given a 12-week driving training, which consisted of theoretical, practical, and online training. And it was really all people with mild cognitive impairment. And I'm sorry if this is quite a complex graph, but what you can see is that before training and after training, and you have in the solid line, you have the group which got training, and you have another group which did not training. And what you can see is the safe driving skill in those people with MCI significantly increased after training. And similarly, the dangerous driving significantly decreased after training. So there is a potential in the future to maybe offer some MCI driving training, which can leave people, keep them safer for longer on the road. But this is ongoing research at the moment, so there are no recommendations so far for this. But just wanted to highlight that MCI improved their safe driving skills and reduced their dangerous driving via such a training program. Just some take-home messages. Most people with dementia will be able to continue driving in the initial stages of the disease. So that's important to remember. Do not panic, but you must notify the DVLA and your insurance. It's really important because otherwise you're due to fines or you're not covered by your insurance. When the disease progresses, cognitive problems in dementia will make it increasingly difficult to drive. And this is something we need to be aware of. The many cognitive problems in dementia, the attention, memory, visual, spatial orientation, make it very hard to remain safe on the road during the middle stages of the disease. And people with mild cognitive impairment are likely allowed to continue driving if their cognitive symptoms are not deemed as too serious. So again, it's all about the level of cognitive problems you have. If they're not serious, then you very likely can continue driving for some time, subject to an assessment and of course, reviews. So this is, I think, overall good news, and people should not fear it. And again, it's just about planning ahead. When the cognitive symptoms get worse, what do we do then? And that all the family is involved in that decision-making with the person with dementia. Just to say a big thank you to my funders. And I have a blog called Dementia Science Explained. If you wanted to have a look at that, I cover a lot of different topics. And yes, I think that's all from me. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take questions later in the Q&A session.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Very interesting, fascinating talk, and we've got quite a few questions to ask you as well. We'll come back to those later. So if you've got any questions you think about asking for Michael, please type it in the Q&A button and we'll ask him later on about that. So thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Rachel Odell, who will be talking us through all about notifiable medical conditions. Now, myself from the Older Drivers Forum know there's loads of these different things. And actually, I hope I don't steal Rachel's thunder, but I know there's one called déjà vu, which is really strange. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later and tell you why déjà vu is a notifiable medical condition. Anyway, Rachel Odell is the Centre Manager for Wessex Drivability, who are one of the many driving mobility centres in the UK. Rachel leads a team of professional driving assessors, a mixture of approved driving instructors and occupational therapists, along with a small team of client administrators. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel. She'll certainly be able to help us to answer all the questions to do with notifiable medical conditions. Thank you, Rachel.
Lovely. Thanks for the introduction, Rob. Hopefully I won't get too many questions about déjà vu, but let's see what comes up. So I'm just going to share my screen now. We'll start my presentation. There we go. And I'll just get that going. Let me just move it out of the way. I've got control bars everywhere. There we go. Okay. So yes, as Rob mentioned there, my presentation today is going to be about notifiable medical conditions and driving. So Rob has mentioned that I am the Centre Manager for Wessex Drivability, and that is one of 20 mobility centres under the umbrella of driving mobility across the nation. And we are the organisations that can perform the medical fitness to drive assessments that Michael alluded to in his talk earlier. Okay then, so thinking about it then, most of you are going to want to know, what is a notifiable medical condition or a disability? Well, in a nutshell, it's anything that could affect your ability to drive safely. So there are a number of different things. So how would you know if you have a condition, you may be newly diagnosed with something, or it could be a pre-existing condition? How would you know what is notifiable? Well, helpfully, there is a very comprehensive list of all sorts of medical conditions published on the direct.gov website. So you can Google notifiable medical conditions and it will direct you to that site. I think Rob is also going to publish various links on the Older Drivers Forum website, which will help if that's not already there. So the list is, as I mentioned, very comprehensive, and not everything on the list is actually notifiable. Each condition has a sort of clickable link, and if you expand those conditions on the website, it will tell you whether or not you do need to notify the DVLA. So Rob just mentioned that we had a couple of polls during the webinar today. So I'm going to ask Rob now to share the poll for my presentation. And the question I want to ask you is, what percentage of drivers with a notifiable medical condition have not notified the DVLA? And the choices are 12%, 26%, 38%, or 52%. So we'll give you a few seconds to cast your votes. Let's see what comes in. Okay, so Rob's going to share the results for us now. So 12% of you thought, 1% of you even thought that it was 12% of drivers hadn't notified. We've got 17% of you thought it was 26% of drivers hadn't notified. Oddly enough, 38% of you thought 38% of drivers hadn't notified, and we've got 44% of you voting for the 52% of drivers not notifying. Thank you very much for that, Rob. Well, I can tell you actually that it's estimated in the UK that 3.4 million drivers have not notified the DVLA. So that's how many drivers haven't notified. And if I tell you that there are actually 8.8 million drivers in the country who have a notifiable medical condition, then it works out that it's just over 38% of people who failed to notify the DVLA. So the 38% of you who said 38%, well done to you. So yeah, it's very interesting, and certainly speaking from experience as a manager of a driving mobility centre, our everyday business is to be assessing people with notifiable medical conditions, and we need to ask the question of them when they apply for an assessment for us, have they notified the DVLA? Because we can't take them out on the road legally if they have not done that. And it is very interesting how many of those drivers haven't done that until we prompt them to do so. Hopefully doctors will also sort of push people in the right direction. Doctors are very knowledgeable about what is notifiable and what isn't, but sometimes they just don't even think about potentially the fact that person is a driver. So you can't rely on your doctor necessarily to be telling you that you do need to notify. So if you are concerned, as I say, go to that DVLA website and find out if your medical condition, and as I say, there are a lot, it's surprising how many. So do go and have a look if you are concerned that there's something you should have told the DVLA about that you haven't done. So Michael touched on some of this earlier. Why is it so important that we do inform the DVLA of our conditions or a disability? It might even be a temporary injury. It could even be a broken limb. So think about something that might even happen to you temporarily. It's not necessarily just the dementia or the stroke, for example. It could be a temporary disability. So do make sure you check them all out. So why is it so important? Well, as I say, it is the law. So that's the most important thing. You are breaking the law if if you were driving with a known notifiable medical condition and you haven't told the DVLA. So first of all, it is the law, and Michael alluded to this. You could be fined up to £1,000 if it's found that you are driving and you haven't told the DVLA. So do consider that. And again, Michael mentioned this, you may not be insured by your insurance company. You might not be fully covered, in which case you're breaking another law because you're driving without insurance. So really, really important. So the DVLA do have a dedicated medical team. They carry out comprehensive medical inquiries to make sure that when somebody does notify of their medical condition, it's the DVLA that will maybe or maybe not launch an investigation into whether that person is still fit to be driving. Oh, sorry, I've gone wrong too far. So why is it, no, sorry, bear with me. So some examples of the driving skills that we need to drive safely. And again, Michael has touched on some of these, but there are many, many skills that we use every day. We don't think about it necessarily when we are driving about. Most of us, it's second nature to be getting behind that wheel. We're not even thinking about what we're doing and all the input that we're having with our bodies, our senses. It's a very complex task, in fact, driving. And these are all the types of things which may be necessary or is necessary to get from A to B behind the wheel. So we're constantly sort of processing information that's flung at us. It might be from feel and touch. You might, if you're on an icy road, you might feel the car start to skid. You might need to use your hearing in order to hear what the revs of the car are doing, when to change gear. You might obviously be using your eyes. We need our eyes to drive, and the information that is sort of being processed by our brains that we're receiving via all those senses allow us to control the car. So it stands to reason that we need all these things to be fully functioning in order to safely control the car, because what our senses process gives the feedback via our brain to our muscles in order to depress the pedals or to have the right amount of steering input. So it's very important that everything is functioning correctly. Okay. So some examples then of a notifiable medical condition. Michael's already talked a lot about dementia, and we already know that from Michael's talk that is one such condition. But there are a couple of others that I will touch on, because some conditions, it's interesting. It's not necessarily notifiable all the time. As Michael said with the MCI, for example, some conditions are only notifiable if it affects your ability to drive safely. So one of these might be stroke, for example. As Michael said, it's quite a common condition. So the rules with stroke: you must not drive for 1 month. So following the stroke, do not need to drive or must not drive for 1 month, but you might not need to notify the DVLA. So basically what happens after that month is whether or not you need then to notify the DVLA, because if you fully recover, I mean, it is fairly uncommon to have a full recovery from stroke after just 1 month. But in the case that you do have a full recovery, and this is in talking to your doctor, don't make that decision by yourselves. Go and talk to your doctor or your clinician, your consultant, and make sure they are happy with your recovery. But if that is the case, then you can continue to drive after that month and no need to notify the DVLA. However, if or after that month, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you haven't fully recovered, you can't resume driving, but you do need to notify the DVLA if you've still got any residual symptoms of that stroke. So in particular, a visual field defect, any cognitive defects, so anything affecting your thinking and your ability to process information, or perhaps an impaired limb function, so where you've lost the use of a limb or one limb has been weakened by the stroke, then the DVLA do want to know about those things. And it could even be just down to, it doesn't have to be a major impact. It could just be something like tingling in the fingers, so a little bit of pins and needles. That is still a symptom of the stroke, and the DVLA will want to know about that, so you do need to notify. So then TIA, similar to stroke, but potentially less severe. So the rules with that one, you mustn't drive for a month, but you don't need to tell the DVLA. Hopefully after a TIA, most people will recover quite sufficiently after that month in order that they're not really impacted severely and they can resume driving. But the thing with TIAs, sometimes they come in multiples. So if you have a multiple TIAs over a short period, then you must not drive, and you must not drive for 3 months. And you must tell the DVLA of those episodes. So it's really important to think about the differences between a single or multiple TIAs. However, if you're 3 months clear of TIAs, then you can then resume driving. So arthritis, and this is another grey area, if you like. So people can drive safely with arthritis. It affects people in different ways. It could be, a couple of joints on your fingers, but it could be your whole body. So you don't need to tell the DVLA, again, unless it affects your ability to drive safely. So it's really important to talk to your doctor again. They can help advise you whether they think that that arthritis is going to impact your driving, in which case, again, you must tell the DVLA. But sometimes arthritis, or indeed the stroke, if it leaves you with a sort of limb impairment, or, as I say, the ability to actually grip the steering wheel or apply the pedals correctly, even the handbrake, if you need to use special controls for your driving, if you have an adapted vehicle, then it's really essential to tell the DVLA. And some conditions, they might not be on that list that I mentioned on the website. Some conditions will require you to be taking medication. And again, it could be a short-term thing. Perhaps you have had a back injury, maybe a slipped disc, and you may be required for a short period of time to be taking medication for a condition. So if there's something where you are taking medication which could affect your driving, then the DVLA will also want to know about this. It's really important to have that conversation with them, and again, your doctor can advise the types of drugs that the DVLA will be interested in. And again, it doesn't mean that they're going to stop you driving. That's the thing. They just want to know about it and want to know how those medications, for example, tramadol is a very strong painkiller, and it might it cause drowsiness. It may even cause blackouts. So it's very important that the DVLA do find out about those things. So have that conversation if you're at all unsure. So how do you inform the DVLA of your medical condition? There are various ways. Michael mentioned the form to be filled in for dementia earlier, but there are different ways you can contact the DVLA. So first off, it's very good. The online website that I mentioned earlier with the medical conditions, that will direct you to the right places to tell them. It might be that you need to download a form to fill in from the online site, but some conditions can simply, or take you through a series of questions, yes or no questions, and you can simply do the whole process online, which is the very easy way to do it. So hopefully everyone here today, you're very computer literate, you're joining our webinar. So if you can use a computer, I thoroughly recommend trying to start online. It's the least frustrating way of doing it, let's say. Following that, the DVLA do have a chat line. So if you want to talk through a medical condition, or particularly those the medicines you may be taking for a condition, it's a good idea to try and use their chat line. Unfortunately, with the DVLA at the moment, they are very slow. They're very understaffed, and COVID has had a big effect on them. So their staffing levels are very low, and it can be a little bit frustrating trying to actually reach a person. So the chat line is the next best option, I would say, to the online, but it may be that they don't have enough staff. So you may be waiting in a queue a little bit to use that chat line. So post then, if you're failing to get hold of the DVLA and getting a little bit frustrated, you may inform them in writing. It's highly likely if you just send them a letter saying I've got dementia, or I've had a stroke, etc., they will then post out to you the forms, the full forms that you need to fill in. So you can get in touch by post, but you'll probably then have to sort of continue to fill in some forms. And the final one there is by phone, and I would not recommend this if you can possibly avoid it, because their phone lines are incredibly busy. We have clients all the time telling us that they're so frustrated. They've tried and tried days after days to get through by phone. So I would avoid it if possible. All the details of all these things are on that direct.gov website. So the phone number for the DVLA is on there. But I would say, my advice to you would be to try the online versions first if you possibly can. Okay, so what happens once the DVLA have been informed? And I think it's important to say, you know, Michael mentioned this earlier, that don't be afraid to notify the DVLA. I think a lot of people are worried that the minute they tell the DVLA about a medical condition, they'll be instantly told to stop driving. And that's simply not the case at all. The DVLA will write to you and they will let you know what the next steps are. I mean, some things, again, if it's just painkillers, they're highly unlikely to take any further action. They'll probably want to know a little bit more about them from you and how they affect your driving, but they're unlikely to go much further with that. However, they might need some more information, and this is the most likely scenario. They will likely write to a healthcare professional, so it might be your GP. You may be under the care of a consultant, so it could be something along those lines, and they will write to the relevant person to find out a bit more about your condition and how that person feels, that medical professional feels that your driving may or may not be impacted. Okay, so they might do these things, and they may go so far as to arrange for you to be examined by a consultant if you're not already under the care of somebody, or they may go all the way to the step of asking you to take a driving assessment. They might refer you to one of our driving mobility centres. And if you want to know a little bit more about the driving assessment process, there was a webinar yesterday, and I believe the link to that is already now on the Older Drivers Forum website. So if you want to backtrack to yesterday's webinar and you missed it and you want to know more about the driving assessment and what it entails, then do check into that webinar and have a look at what's involved. And the DVLA, more than likely, especially if they send you for a driving assessment, they will require an eyesight test, because some conditions, Michael mentioned, dementia can have an impact on your vision, but certainly things like stroke, very much, you may be left with a visual deficit. So we want to know, and the DVLA will want to know if your eyesight meets the current standards to drive. So it's very important that they take these steps. But as I say, do not be afraid to notify them. You must do it by law. Do not be afraid your license will instantly be revoked. That's certainly not the case. Okay, just to mention, everything is taking longer than usual because of the coronavirus and the disruption at the DVLA. Okay, so what happens then if they are launching a medical investigation into you? Can you continue to drive? So if they send you to, or refer you to a driving assessment centre, can you continue to drive? So a lot of this comes down to you as much as anything. You are responsible for ensuring that you feel safe to drive. So that's the most important thing first. Do you feel that you're safe? If the answer is no, then it would be a good idea to stop if you don't feel you're safe. But if you are going to attend for a driving assessment, then it may be a good idea, as Michael mentioned earlier, to keep up the practice, because if people suddenly just stop until they're waiting for the assessment and that assessment might not come for 3 or 4 months, then it's a good idea just to keep familiarization with your driving. Okay, so your doctor is really key in this, so talk to them, and they should be able to tell you if they feel it's safe for you to continue to drive. However, of course, if your doctor does say to stop, it's really important to stop. If a medical professional says, yes, you need to cease driving, even if you are going to come for the driving assessment, if you're told to stop by a doctor, then you must do that, because it can affect your insurance cover if you've been told to stop and you carry on. Okay, you may wish to refer yourself to a driving mobility centre. It's not always that the DVLA will send people to us. Quite often a doctor or a family member might suggest to you that you self-refer for a driving assessment. So that will cement, sometimes it's a good thing to do that in any case, because if the DVLA are going to be carrying out an investigation, it can take a long time for them to actually get round to the referral process themselves. So you might want to preempt that process and refer yourself, because quite often, if we have a safe outcome with your drive at the driving mobility centre, then it cements your case to say that you are safe to drive with your medical condition. So sometimes the investigation might take a long time, as I mentioned, and your license may run out in that time. So what happens then? So you don't have a valid driving license, and the DVLA are reluctant to renew it while they're undertaking these investigations. Well, in this case, you are covered unless you have been told to stop driving. under what's called Section 88 of the Road Traffic Act. And this enables a driver, as long as you have submitted your renewal papers to renew that licence, if the DVLA haven't yet given it to you, as long as you've put your papers in and nobody has told you to stop driving, then you may carry on. And that Section 88 cover will last for up to a year from when you submitted your renewal papers. And normally that's sufficient time for the DVLA to have carried out all their inquiries and to either issue your licence or, unfortunately, they may revoke. But in that meantime, you can continue to drive. But at the moment, again, mentioning COVID and the DVLA disruption, you may have even heard some stories about this in the news. Everything is taking so long that we are starting to come across people who submitted their renewal paperwork over a year ago and their Section 88 has expired. In that case, obviously, they cannot drive. However, if you wish to renew your Section 88, simply apply again. So it's renewing your licence papers again, and the Section 88 will restart again from that moment. The DVLA will not actually confirm with you. All you will get, if when you send these renewal papers, they will simply acknowledge that they've received them. It's very important that you get that letter from the DVLA to acknowledge they have received them, because at the moment they are taking a long time to process paperwork. So it's a good idea to get your renewal papers in good time before your license actually expires, because they will need 3 to 4 weeks to process those papers. Everything does still involve a manual input with the DVLA. So get that application in good time, and then you will be covered from that moment by Section 88. But as I say, the DVLA won't say you are covered by Section 88, because a lot of it does rely on you as the driver to satisfy conditions. So the DVLA don't know if your doctor has told you to stop driving. The DVLA don't know if you feel safe or not. So it's up to you as the driver to make that decision, and Section 88 relies on those, basically. So surrendering your license then. There are some times where it would be a good idea to surrender your license, but you must surrender under these following conditions. So first off, if your doctor has informed you that you must stop driving completely, if you're not waiting on a driving assessment and they've not said stop until you've had the assessment, if they say your condition is such that you must stop driving with immediate effect, then you should surrender your driver's license. Or in some cases, your doctor might inform you you have to stop driving for 3 months or more. And this might be down to a condition that, at first, they don't know how that's going to go. They don't know if you're going to make a recovery. It could be a very complicated broken limb. It could be as simple as that. But if there's any condition that's going to stop you driving for 3 months or more, even if that is temporary, then you should surrender your driver's license. So yes, it's basically, so if your medical condition, as I said, affects your ability to drive safely and lasts for 3 months or more. And also if you aren't meeting the required standards of driving because of your medical condition. So if your eyesight, for example, if you can't read a number plate at 20 meters, you may be waiting on a cataract operation, for example. However, you mustn't drive during that time if your eyesight isn't such, or if you're not meeting required standards of driving for any other reason because of your medical condition. So sometimes conditions get better, that's the happy thing. Not everything progresses, some things do get better. So when you do feel you're making a recovery, then you can reapply for your licence if you've surrendered it. So it doesn't mean stopping driving altogether just because you've surrendered. And it's often better to surrender rather than wait to be revoked by the DVLA, because the process of reapplying is much simpler. So if you do think there's a danger of the DVLA catching up with you via your doctor and taking your licence away, then it's a good idea to surrender before that happens, because you can reapply if your medical standards get better. So if you've had your cataract operation, for example, and your eyesight has improved, then you are likely to meet the standards. So you can then reapply for your surrendered license. It doesn't mean end of just because you've given it up. And then whilst they are processing that application, you're back to the Section 88 cover. So once you've put in that application, and as long as your doctor says you meet the requirements, that's really important to get your doctor's backup on this one, then you are likely to be covered under Section 8 of the Road Traffic Act. So you can then resume driving, but really, really important, as I say, talk to your doctor on that one. So just some useful links here. I believe that Rob will be putting these up on the Older Drivers Forum website. So if you don't have a pen and paper handy, then here are some useful links which you can look at later. But just to talk you through, so the first one is the A to Z list of all conditions. So as I mentioned, they're not all notifiable. So it's just an A to Z list of all types of common medical conditions, including under D, the déjà vu. And you can click on those and see whether or not you need to notify. And then the second one there is the link to the online notifying process that I mentioned earlier. That's the best one to do if you possibly can. And then there's a link to more information about the Section 88 cover that I mentioned. And that's useful even if you don't have a notifiable medical condition. A lot of you, as we saw in the poll, a lot of you are over 70. So you're in the situation where you are renewing your license every 3 years, whether or not you have a medical condition. And you're very likely to get caught up in this DVLA fiasco. So don't be afraid if you've put your application in and you don't have your driver's license back. Find out a little bit more about your Section 88 cover to satisfy yourself whether you can continue to drive. And the final one there is the link to the Driving Mobility umbrella website, so you can find out a little bit more about the work that we do on the fitness to drive assessments. So thanks very much for listening. Hope you're all still with us at the moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll go back to Rob, and I believe we're going to have questions and answers now.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that very informative input to us. Very important. And yes, all the links that Rachel's spoken about actually are on our website. So if people wanted to visit our website, it's olderdriversforum.com. And basically there's a page which says advice. Click on that and there's a drop down, and one covers medical conditions and has all those links that Rachel's got. I will just double check at the end of the webinar to make sure they're all up to date and all there, but I'm very confident. I just had a quick look while we were talking and they do seem to be there. So that's great. Right, time for some questions, and we've got quite a few who have come in. So I think really important one to start with. On both of your talks, really, we had people failing to notify the DVLA. I mean, on Michael's, 30% of people weren't telling them about dementia, which is quite shocking. And also, Rachel mentioned that 3.4 million people, 38% of people failed to notify the DVLA. Have we got any reason why you think people are failing to tell the DVLA about these conditions? I know you hinted at this, Rachel, but is it purely just to do with sort of worry about being revoked from their license, or what?
Main reasons, Rob. I think, yes, very much the fear that the driver's license will be taken away. And that's really not the case, as there would have to be substantial evidence from a doctor that somebody really wasn't safe. It's not a case of as soon as you notify, that license will go. So I think that reassuring people that that's not the case. But I also think a lot of people just do not know. It's simple, and I don't really want to say ignorance, but not knowing about the fact they do need to notify it. The doctor doesn't tell them. I personally wouldn't have known necessarily before starting this job that conditions were notifiable. I mean, I think we know the big ones like dementia and stroke, Parkinson's, perhaps multiple sclerosis, but there are so many uncommon ones that people simply don't know. And I think it's really key that medical professionals are very clued up on this, and they tell their patients, especially if they are drivers, that they should notify. So those are the two key factors in people not notifying. It might not be their fault, they just simply didn't know.
You are, I'm not sure if it's just me, but you're coming over a bit of a Dalek at the moment, I'm afraid. So you might want to just turn your speaker off or turn it back on again, and we'll see if that rectifies it. Was she a Dalek to you as well, Michael?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good. It's not just me. So we got most of it. Anything you want to add to that, Michael?
I think, there's, well, Rachel already mentioned so many, there's a lot of fear about this clearly, but I think the other aspect for us, for older people, as I mentioned this very briefly, is also where they live. And especially if you live in rural locations or you have very poor public transport links, people are much more reluctant. Even they might be aware that they have to relinquish their license, but they do not, because where they're going to go, if you have, you live in a village where there's twice a day a bus, it's very, very hard to go anywhere. And of course, it not only impacts your practicalities, but also your social life, which we know that social isolation is huge in aging. So these are the considerations. So it's very easy to judge, but there are studies, I know, for dementia which show that if people have better public transport links, they're more likely to relinquish their license, which makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, and I think in the current climate, someone mentioned maybe it's down to some of the current cuts that the government are having on public transport is making people think. And I also think at the moment, coronavirus has a big impact to people really at the end of the day. We're seeing a lot more people who are not wanting, who may have decided that, now's the time to retire from driving, but actually thinking, you know what, I only do a short distance here, there and everywhere. And actually, I might just stay in the car because I don't want to get in a taxi. I don't want to get on the bus because of the fear of coronavirus. The only thing I would say, I can understand your point of view, but at the end of the day, you've got to be safe on the road, because the last thing you'd want is to cause the death to someone else on the road or yourself. And that can happen. Most collisions and fatalities occur within about a 5-mile radius where people live. So it's, even though the roads, those are the most riskiest roads for you. So it's just something to be aware of that. So please don't take those risks. Okay, let's have a look at a little bit more on here. One really for you, Michael. Is mild cognitive impairment a notifiable medical condition? I know we said that it was, but it seems confusing in what you said. Is it or isn't it? And who actually decides whether people do that? Or is it just part of old age?
Yeah, it's a very confusing category. I agree with that. But basically, a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment will be done by your doctor. So once you see your GP or doctor and they will give you the diagnosis, then you have an official diagnosis. So you cannot self-diagnose
Right.
a condition of mild cognitive impairment. I hope that clarifies it. So once you get the official diagnosis, you need to notify the DVLA. Yeah,
and I know many people may not even know if they've got it, because they may just put it down to being just, well, that's me just getting, getting old really at the end of the day. So I should imagine many go undiagnosed.
It depends. It's so variable. So you have the whole range. You have some people who are very fearful that they have some memory problems and they might develop dementia, and they might not want to go to the doctor and wait for very, very long to see the doctor. While others, they might be what we would call the worried well. They report they have many memory problems and they're forgetting everything all day. And I always say to them, well, welcome to my world. I forget every day, everything. It's really, the difference is the doctor will make a formal assessment whether the memory problems are really something you should worry about or not. So there is a range, and it's very difficult. And a mild cognitive impairment is this kind of, I guess, gray area where there is some impairment, but it doesn't affect people's everyday lives. And that's why people are given this diagnosis. But as I said, not everybody will develop dementia when having a mild cognitive impairment. Okay, that's wonderful. Also, can anyone give me a guide on how stress affects safe performance of a driver with dementia, please? Perhaps long-term stress or stress from a given situation, such as a driving assessment. Does that really affect someone's dementia when they're taking part in an assessment or an appraisal? Rachel, do you want to talk about the assessment side? Because I wouldn't know whether...
That's fine.
Rachel, you're still being a bit of a Dalek, so difficult for us. So I might get you, if you wouldn't mind, just probably, if you can leave again and then join back on your link again, that might just reset it for us. Michael, in the meantime, is that something that you may be able to mention how dementia affects?
I cannot talk about the assessment side, but in general, yes, stress will make an impact. And that's why I said avoid stressful situations like rush hour traffic. I think in particular, it's just such an overload of information at that time. And then the attentional problems become just much more exacerbated.
Yes, that's great. Well, that was quick, Rachel. You did very quick joining us back again. And it sounds like it sorted it. So great.
Oh, excellent. Well, I hope the presentation was okay. I hope
it was. Yeah, no problems at all.
That. That's good. And hopefully I'm less Dalek-like now.
You're perfect now.
Good stuff. So yes, hopefully Michael's just sort of talked about the link between stress and dementia and how that can be exacerbated. But just to say, obviously the driving assessment is naturally a stressful process for anybody undertaking it. A lot of people will look at it as a test. that's understandable. It's not a test, but we do want to see that people are driving safely. So we try and do everything we possibly can to put all our drivers at ease before they come or get out in the car, and also to the extent where we start in the assessment room with someone, trying to talk to them and put them at ease and get them as relaxed as possible. And then when they go in the car for the assessment, we spend some time off road. We don't go straight out on the public roads with them, so we give them some time to drive up and down and get familiar with the vehicle, because just to add to the stress, that our driving assessments are undertaken in a centre vehicle, not the client's own, and the reason for that being that all our vehicles do have a dual brake in them for everybody's safety. Some of our clients are very safe and some are very unsafe, so we don't know what we're getting from 1 minute to the next, so we just want to ensure that. But we are very aware of that. Our assessors are very nice people, and they will do everything they can to put our clients at ease, because at the end of the day, we don't want to tell people to stop driving. It's not very nice for us to have to do that, so we want everyone to do their best on the assessment. So we do everything we can to put them at ease.
That's wonderful. And also, Rachel, if someone wanted to self-refer themselves to you, what is the cost to undertake one of those? I know it varies across the country, but say where you are in Southampton.
Yeah, absolutely. For us at Wessex, and we're fairly ballpark across all of the driving mobility centres, but our self-referral fee is £115. It's a very detailed assessment, and it does involve an occupational therapist and a driving advisor, so hence the cost, which might be a little more expensive than perhaps one of the local authority schemes, but ours is a very in-depth assessment and takes about 2 to 2.5 hours. So you get what you pay for, as I say, you get your money's worth. Some driving mobility centres are slightly more expensive, some slightly less. So, but we are pretty much a sort of middle of the roads figure, so £115.
So I sent you a bit of a low baller, didn't I, at the start, which was about déjà vu. You want me to answer that?
If you feel confident to. If not, I'm happy to take that one.
Right. Well, my research showed of it, because when I actually looked at all, and there's about 183 notifiable medical conditions actually out there. So, and I know when people go to renew their driving license on the D1 online or whatever, you're actually only asked around about 4 or 5 medical conditions. So that could well be a reason why people don't know to notify, because they're only asked about 4 or 5. So it's really important, certainly when we apply for a license or renew a license, that we actually just have a quick look. You know what? I've got this condition. Let me have a look. It's on our website, like I say, under medical conditions. Just check. As Rachel said, it's got lots of details. And I did exactly that. I decided to have an exploratory look down the list. And I saw déjà vu and I thought, what? And I saw déjà vu and I thought, what? Sorry, I'm going over the same thing there. Little joke, but there we are. But actually, déjà vu is actually apparently something to do in serious. When it gets quite serious, is something actually to do with epilepsy. So wasn't aware of that really before, but it's quite fascinating how different conditions and things like words that we know so easily actually can be notifiable medical condition. Do you think that explains it well enough?
That's perfect. Yeah, absolutely, Rob. It's not the déjà vu itself. It's symptomatic of another medical condition, effectively. Yeah. Yes.
Because I think we all have déjà vu moments. That's part of life, isn't it, really? So going back to you, Michael, what is vascular dementia and how might it affect my driving?
Yes, so vascular dementia is the second most common form of dementia. So what I've talked today about was really the most Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia together. But vascular dementia, so the biggest difference between Alzheimer's disease is caused by proteins, which are basically clumping together in the brain and become toxic to the nerve cells. While vascular dementia is caused by the blood vessels, and either the blood vessels, they get obstructed or they rupture, and that causes then dementia. So it's a different mechanism how vascular dementia kind of affects the brain. And very often people with vascular dementia, they have what we call a stepwise progression. So they stay pretty stable and then they have an event in the blood vessels and then they go a bit down and then they stay stable again. So it goes like this, while with somebody with Alzheimer's disease would go more regularly, progressively down. And vascular dementia, yes, also affects very often your judgment and your decision making. Is a is a big thing in vascular dementia, and also your visual spatial ability. And that can get worse. Again, it depends which step you're on, and that can be very individual. But then this would affect your driving performance quite significantly. And some people with vascular dementia can also have much larger strokes, and Rachel talked about strokes, and that's clearly then you have usually it's a much larger area of the brain is affected, in your cognition or your motor system even will be affected by that.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, a diagnosis of dementia can be a very scary thing. And as you've already pointed out, Michael, there's degrees of it. And, some early diagnoses on it picks it up. There are a lot of occasions that you can continue driving, but it's good to get it looked at over the case and reviewed to when that time when maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How are we getting on with finding a cure for dementia, or working towards something that actually can stop its development? Is there any sort of thing going on with that?
Yes, so some people might have heard, of course, that there's a new medication just came out now in the US, which is the first medication for Alzheimer's disease specifically, which affects these proteins clumping together, which I've mentioned before. And that the first indication is that it potentially slows down the disease, but it's still, these effects are very mild. So that's all we're talking about at the moment, is slowing down the disease via medication, but nobody's at the moment talking about curing it completely.
Yeah.
Instead, what we're focusing on is much more the prevention side. So people always underestimate that 40% of all dementias are preventable via just simple lifestyle factors. So if you live healthily, you are much less likely to develop dementia. So this is really something very important to remember, always to stay active.
So healthy diet, healthy eating the right things. I mean, we see
being
all these
physically
things on the TV.
active is enormously important. And of course, the older we get, usually, I talk about myself, you're looking at my children, the less active I am. It's the kids are running around all day. And of course, a lot of people have physical conditions which do not allow them to go out and about. But as active as you can be, eat healthily, be socially engaged, and the old thing, learn something new. So always when people tell me, I've been doing the Times crosswords for the last 30 years, and I said, that's great, maybe you should do something different now. And that really gets our brain going. So keeping your brain active is really important for that as well.
Great, really good advice. So thank you for that. So just moving on, this is maybe one we might not be able to answer today, maybe tomorrow, but it says, I have peripheral neuropathy, but never been actually diagnosed definitely. Where do I stand with this? I mean, is that something they need to tell someone about, or any links anybody can answer? I know that really has a very strong link to diabetes, doesn't it?
Rachel, you want to answer this?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, obviously, if there's not a formal diagnosis, then you wouldn't necessarily need to notify the DVLA, but no formal diagnosis. But we do see a lot of people at our mobility centre with that condition. So it might be a good idea to book yourself in for a driving assessment just to check that everything's okay, even if you don't necessarily need to notify the DVLA. Just make sure everything's okay.
Yeah, I think the key with neuropathy is that sometimes it can affect your feeling in particular, and so pressing down the pedals when accelerating or braking, that can make the big difference. So as Rachel said, you might want to discuss it with somebody.
Yeah, and I think some of the research we've done, it's really important people to look at that. There are some good research on there that actually can retrain the body to get some feeling back on by some proper training things. So it doesn't mean that you're going to lose it completely. It's just retraining some ways how your brain works to work that again. But it is important that you make sure you get it checked properly, because the problem you can get is it can cause what we call pedal confusion collisions as well, where people don't have that feeling, they're not sure where their foot is, and therefore something we really want to avoid as well.
Yeah. And just to say, Rob, I mean, sometimes we ultimately recommend that somebody swaps their method of driving. So they may be driving a standard car at the moment, a manual or an automatic, but it might be that we can help you, change your car for something with a different form of driving, such as push-pull hand controls, that type of thing. So it may be that somebody just needs to change the way they drive. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not, need to come off the road altogether.
Yeah, and we had an interesting one here. A lady's put in saying her daughter was immediately stopped driving by the GP after a report from the GP, despite her consultant saying that it was all clear for her to drive. I did ask what the condition was, and it appears that she has a sleep problem, which wants her to feel asleep, but she doesn't suddenly fall asleep at any time. But if she feels tired, she would just stop and take a quick break. I think that was very much down to medication, they said, which rectified it. But is this something that we can see happening really? Is there sometimes that the DVLA do a sudden reaction if they're concerned?
It sounds as though that wasn't the DVLA that took the license away. It sounds more like the medical professionals disagreed amongst themselves. So, I think in that case, then do notify the DVLA and let them make their investigations. Yeah, it does sound, I mean, that's a classic example that I was going back to about medication. Some medication can cause daytime drowsiness, and the DVLA are very interested in those type of things because, obviously it can affect your driving if you're not fully alert and awake, as Michael said earlier. So, in that case, I think refer to the DVLA. They may send that person to us for a driving assessment, and we might ultimately say that she's perfectly safe. So that would be the route that I would recommend.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, if we're looking at some point, some conditions will mean that we have to stop driving or retire driving, as I prefer to put it. Have we got any sort of tips to encourage people to plan for that happening?
Yeah, I think that's very much what Michael talked about. Again, we would call it retirement from driving. So we very much would encourage people, especially if we see them now and they're safe. But we might say, look, in 6 months' time, you will need to come back to us for a reassessment because your condition is worsening. And in that point, you might not be safe. We might be delivering different news. I should just mention, if people do come back for a reassessment, we class that as a checkup and it's half price fee, just so you know. But yeah, we would encourage that driver at the point of their safe driving outcome to say, look, you do need to think about planning, as Michael said, start maybe taking the bus one day a week, start thinking about how people can help you, where do you need to go and how can you get there. So, looking online at different transport links, community transport, friends and neighbours that can help, that type of thing. So start doing the research early, and then it's less of a shock when you do actually have to, hang up the car keys for good, as we would say. Yeah.
Okay. We're having a lot of questions about the Section 88, and I think that's really, I know you covered it in detail a bit, Rachel. I think that's really because a lot of people are having difficulty communicating with the DVLA at the moment. They're not responding to emails. They're not responding to telephone calls. Like you say, they're swamped because of the COVID situation, hoping that will get better. And some people are applying for their license and it's over a year they haven't had it back. I get emails almost weekly on exactly this. And what I'd say to people is, there's lots of information on our website about this. I have added a section on Section 88 to it, so you can click on it, read the details yourself, all about it. It's best because we're all individuals. We've all individual situations that apply. Have a look at the website. Basically, it's under, again, the advice tab, and then it's the law and the DVLA. Under that, I've got lots of information about Section 88. So have a look and explore on that. I know some people have said, my question is, does Section 88 apply when I reapply? I don't know if that's one that you could answer.
So I'm guessing the question is, well, it's either reapply for a full license, obviously, in which case, yes, as long as you fulfill the criteria, have a look at the full leaflet, but the criteria, the main ones are, have you submitted your paperwork? And as I say, I would allow the DVLA a good 3 to 4 weeks before your license expires to get that processed. So make sure your renewal paperwork's gone in, and you must not have been told to stop driving by a medical professional. Those are the 2 key criteria, in which case, yes, you should be covered. But if the question is about the Section 88 running out and reapplying for that, then yes, again, get your renewal papers in again. As Rob mentioned, a lot of cases are taking over a year now. The DVLA are awful. So reapply for your license in exactly the same way, and Section 88 will start again with that process. So you will be covered for another year. Hopefully that'll answer the question.
Yeah, no, that's good. There's an interesting one. Someone's put, how much of this all applies to a cyclist? Well, I could probably answer that. Obviously, you don't have a driving license as a cyclist, I'm afraid. All I would say is, yes, you could cycle with many of these conditions, and some of them actually would benefit from some exercise and things like that. But if have got a balance issue, if you've got an issue with not being able to see properly or something like that, then I think common sense would have to prevail. You know, you want to be able to be safe to yourself on the road because you don't want to be putting yourself in a dangerous position, but you also want to make sure that you're not a risk to others as well. So I think a lot of that comes down, but there's no legality. There is a law of wanton and furious cycling, an old 1888, I think it is, under the Town Police Clauses Act. I'm dragging out my law. It might be somewhat out of date, but there is a thing called wanton and furious cycling. And I think they're looking at introducing careless cycling offence as well. So you could be, if things like that happen, could be an offence that could occur within that. Right. If the driving license is expired, I think we've covered that, so I will say that. I had a first seizure in April 21, notified the DVLA in May. DVLA revoked my license in July, and I'm waiting for a consultant to return the form. So can I reapply now?
I would wait, to be honest, and get the sign on by the consultant. It's really important that the consultant says that you are fit to go back to driving. So try and talk to them if you possibly can. And then, yes, you may reapply as soon as they say you can do. Sometimes the DVLA, there obviously wasn't anything in that letter, I presume, but sometimes the DVLA will give you an indication of when you can reapply. Sometimes with seizures, it's a year off the road, and often the DVLA will give you some sort of indication. But yeah, talk to your consultant is what I would say.
Yeah, and a couple of bits just to do with just to come back onto assessments again. One says, and I can probably answer these, are assessments on automatic as well as manual cars? Well, I know because I work with driving mobility centres that they have manual and automatic cars, big cars, little cars, everything to cater for your individual needs. So not a problem on that. Also, where are the driving assessment centres you are talking about? Are they in the Southwest? Well, as Rachel said, there's a website called Driving Mobility. There's a link to it on our website. So if you went onto the page called courses and scroll down, you'll see there's a link to driving mobility on there. That will then take you, and then it says find a centre. You put in your postcode or the town that you live in, and it will direct you to your nearest centre. And in the Southwest, your nearest one is Exeter in Cornwall, and each centre has loads of different outreach centres that cover people to help them as well. I've taken your thunder away from you a bit, Rachel, haven't I?
Yeah, that's fine. I was going to say, yes, Truro is where Cornwall Mobility are based. And as you say, they have a centre in Plymouth, they have a centre in Exeter, and then Bristol also have a centre. So the Southwest has, it's a big area, obviously, but there is quite a lot of coverage, as much as we possibly can.
Yeah. Here we are. My daughter has chronic fatigue since catching COVID. She's the only one in the household with a driving license, but I am worried that her constant tiredness is increasing her risk of an accident on the road. What is your advice on that? Is that something maybe you've come across, Rachel, at all with
not so far, but I think we are likely to be starting to see referrals with this condition. It's such a new condition. I don't think that much is known about it, but I think you're right to be concerned. She should probably just keep her driving to when she feels awake and well, if possible. I don't know that it comes on suddenly. I think it's something chronic. I imagine it's something that's with her all the time. So I would say try not to drive long distances where she's going to be doing long time behind the wheel. Try and keep it short and simple and necessary, basically.
Yeah.
Just to add to this, so we ran a recent study looking at cognition in older people, actually, but we also added a question on long COVID. So we're currently looking into that. Okay. How many people have long COVID and whether this affects their cognition and potentially their driving. But as Rachel said, it's new territory for all of us. It's we don't know yet how it affects the driving or the cognition itself.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing for many people, really, isn't it? Another one: if driving license is expired before applying for renewal for over 70, and the GP is happy for me to drive, I've had 2 instantaneous blackouts walking. And falls 18 months ago with no investigatory outcome to date. can I drive while still waiting for a renewed license applied for 6 months ago?
Yes, absolutely. That's section 88. Blackouts don't necessarily preclude you from driving, especially 18 months ago. It's a considerable time if they haven't happened since and your consultant says that you can drive. As long as your renewal papers have gone in, then yes, you satisfy the conditions of section 88 and you can drive.
Well, I think we've pretty much gone through those questions at the moment, and I think I've worn you both out from loads of different questions and this, that, and the other. So I think I'm just going to wrap up and say thank you very much to Professor Michael Hornberger and Rachel Odell for your wonderful input today on your great presentations and also answering the wonderful questions that we had coming in. For those people who want to know a lot of information, like I say, please do explore our website. We have so much information on the website for you to have a look at. So at the end of this webinar, you'll be sent automatically to my website. What I would say is have a good look around it. There's lots of different things. Drop down on all the different tabs to see what's in there. So we're trying to help. And if you've got any other ideas or things that should be in there, let me know, because it's one of those things that we want to keep up to date to help you to carry on driving safely for longer. At the end of this webinar, you'll have a short survey that will come up. Really useful to us if you just fill that in and close it. That would be great, and submit it. That would be useful for us. Like I say, we've got 2 more webinars left for the rest of this week. I have one this afternoon, which we still have space and you still time to register for. I'm doing that with Valerie Singleton, and it's on dash cams. So should we have them? So that would be quite useful. And then we've got one tomorrow, which is on, just get the list on it, and eyesight and diabetes and understanding the effects on driving, and we've still got some places on that. So if you want to know all about driving with eyesight, and we've got an optician, and we've also got an expert talking about diabetes and the effects that that can have on driving. So thank you very much for everybody for it today. I'm just going to say it's been a great webinar today, really informative. It's a specialist subject, but we're really grateful to our speakers for their help today. So I'm going to say thank you to everybody and